The day everything changed started the same way most of our days did. Mila and I were doing our usual after-school routine, the kind that felt so ordinary I never thought to appreciate it. She was negotiating over snacks, trying to convince me, with complete seriousness, that a granola bar counted as a cookie. I was pretending to consider it. She launched into one of her signature stories, the kind that began with a dragon and a teacher and somehow ended with the extinction of all humanity. I was laughing. She was glowing. Then, without warning, I was in the hospital. I'm not going to turn this into a medical drama. The machines, the beeping, the fluorescent lights, none of that is the point. The only detail that matters is this. I was stuck behind a curtain, and my daughter Mila was 5 years old and terrified. She stood as close to me as she possibly could, her little fingers barely catching on my sleeve. She was not pulling, not tugging, just holding on, the way a child holds on when she is afraid that letting go means losing you forever. Her eyes were wide in that particular way children's eyes get when they are trying to be brave, because they can feel the fear radiating off every adult in the room. A nurse leaned in with a gentle but firm voice and explained that Mila could not stay in the treatment area. She asked if there was anyone who could come and take her. I looked at my daughter's face and said yes, I could call my parents. I heard my own voice working very hard to sound calm and normal, like this was simply inconvenient rather than the most terrifying moment of my life. My parents lived nearby. They were the kind of people who were always busy, but they were also the kind of people who loved looking helpful in public. A hospital, with its witnesses and its fluorescent lighting, felt like exactly the kind of stage where they would show up. The nurse made the call and came back to tell me they were on their way. Mila exhaled with her entire body, like she had been holding her breath for hours. She climbed onto the chair beside my bed, folded her hands in her lap like an invisible teacher had told her to be good, and waited. My parents arrived about 40 minutes later. I know this because Mila asked me every few minutes how many minutes were left, and I kept staring at the clock as though I could force time to behave if I looked hard enough. When the curtain finally swished open, my mother appeared first, her face arranged into an expression of concern, so precise it looked rehearsed in front of a mirror. My father came in right behind her, scanning the room with his eyes in a way that reminded me he was always checking for cameras, always counting witnesses. Mila practically launched herself off the chair. She cried out for her grandmother and ran to her with the full weight of relief that only a frightened child can carry. My mother bent down and opened her arms wide. She hugged Mila tightly, the theatrical kind of hug you perform when you want the entire world to see that you are hugging someone. She cooed and said, "Sweetheart," and then she looked past Mila directly at me. I tried to sit up and failed. I tried to smile and failed. I asked them as clearly and calmly as I could manage to take Mila home for the night. Just for tonight, I said. I did not know yet if they were keeping me. There was one heartbeat, one single moment where I genuinely believed she would say yes, because this is what families do. This is what grandparents do. You do not need a reason beyond. Your child is in the emergency room and her daughter needs someone she knows. But my mother's expression did not stay at concern. It shifted, fast and subtle, from concern to calculation. And then she did a little laugh. Light, breezy, the kind of laugh adults perform when they want something to feel smaller and more manageable, and most importantly, not their problem. She said my name and she did not even bother to lower her voice. She said it out loud, right there in front of Mila, as casually as if my daughter were a lamp or a piece of furniture, something present in the room but not capable of hearing. She said that Mila was a bit of a nightmare, and that I knew what she was like. I watched it land on my daughter. I watched her shoulders pull inward. I watched her face go blank in a way that made my stomach fall. She did not cry immediately. She froze first, the way small bodies freeze when they are trying to decide whether it is safer to disappear. I felt something break open inside me. Not rage exactly, more like a terrible, icy clarity. I told my mother not to say that in front of her. I kept my voice steady because Mila was watching me, and I needed her to see me hold it together. I asked them again to please just take her. My father shifted his weight, glanced at his watch, and said 2 words. "We can't. No apology, no explanation, no softening." He said it the way you say it when someone asks you to water their plants and you simply do not feel like it. I asked him what he meant. My mother sighed and glanced toward the nurse's station, clearly worried about her image. She said they were busy. She said they could not do this right now. I let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and I told her I was in the emergency room. She looked at me and she said, "You are awake, you are talking, you are fine." Then she leaned in and kissed my forehead quickly, perfunctory, the kind of kiss that feels like a rubber stamp, said something cheerful to Mila, turned around and walked out. My father followed. They did not take Mila. They simply left. For a moment, I genuinely could not move because my brain refused to process what my eyes had just seen. It felt like watching someone commit a social crime in slow motion, the kind where surely someone steps in, surely an alarm goes off, surely the universe corrects itself. But the universe did not correct itself. The curtains swished closed behind them. Mila made a small sound, soft and strangled, the sound of a child trying desperately to swallow her own crying because she had just been told she was a nightmare and she did not want to prove them right. A nurse stepped in gently and told me they needed to move Mila out of the treatment area. I reached for my daughter. I told her she had not done anything wrong. I told her I was there even though I was not sure I could keep that promise. I watched a stranger gently peel my daughter's fingers off my sleeve and lead her down a hallway, and I could not go with her. That is the part that lives in me still, not the leaving. The fact that Mila looked back at me as she was taken away, and I was completely unable to follow. Hours blurred together after that. Every time anyone came near me, my first question was always the same. Where is my daughter? They told me she was safe. And in that tiny, careful pause before and after their answers, I learned a new kind of fear I did not have a name for before that night. When I finally got my phone back, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. There were no messages from my mother, no checking in, no update about Mila, nothing. The next afternoon, I had notifications. My sister Sloane had posted. Sloane was always posting. In my family, she was the sun that everything else orbited around, and she had posted a series of photos from what looked like a beautiful day on the water. Bright sky, smiling children, boat railing, a stunning amount of visible happiness. And there in the background of the third photo, clear as anything, were my parents, grinning. They were not busy. They were not dealing with something important. They were not trapped. They were on a luxury sea tour with my sister's children, while hospital staff arranged emergency care for mine. I set my phone down very carefully. The way you set down a glass you already know is about to shatter. Not long after my parents walked out of that curtained area, someone else walked in. She did not look like a nurse. She did not look like hospital staff. She looked like someone who belonged in my life, except she had not been in it for a long time. My Aunt Irene. She was older than my mother, childless and quietly wealthy in a way that never needed to announce itself. When I was small, she was the person who remembered my favorite snacks, who asked what I was reading, who spoke to me like I was interesting rather than useful. Then she had been removed from my life, gradually and completely, the way certain people are removed when they make the wrong people uncomfortable. I blinked up at her from the hospital bed, not entirely sure I was not imagining her. She looked at me and asked only one question. Where is Mila? A nurse answered before I could. She is in the family room. She is safe. My aunt's eyes narrowed slightly and she asked about the grandparents. The nurse paused the way professionals pause when they are choosing words carefully. She said that staff had stepped in because there had been no available guardian. She said the grandparents had come earlier and left. My aunt nodded once, slowly, the nod of someone filing information under exactly what she had already suspected. Then she sat down close to my bed and took my hand in both of hers. Her grip was warm and completely steady, the opposite of my mother's quick, stamped forehead kiss. She told me she was listed as an emergency contact, that they had called her. I did not remember putting her name down. She said gently that I had done it years ago, probably on a school form. You knew who would show up, she said. That sentence should have been purely comforting. It was. It was also quietly devastating, because it meant some part of me had been quietly preparing for this kind of abandonment for a very long time, without ever admitting it to myself. Before I could respond, the curtain moved again. My parents walked back in, and they did not walk in quietly or nervously. They walked in like people who expected to take over the scene, like the hospital had simply been holding their place in line until they were ready to return. My mother's face was arranged into concern again. My father's brow was knitted into seriousness. It was, I have to admit, a genuinely good performance. My parents are very skilled at looking like parents. Then my mother saw my aunt sitting beside me and the performance collapsed. The concerned expression vanished so quickly it was almost impressive. My father stopped mid-step. His eyes moved to the nurse, then to the social worker standing near the curtain, then back to my aunt. He was counting witnesses. That was when I understood why they had actually returned. Not because they had suddenly felt regret about leaving Mila, because someone official had called them back and there were now records being made. The social worker said she needed to document what had happened earlier regarding the minor child. My mother immediately switched into a sweet, accommodating voice and said there had simply been a misunderstanding, that they had been confused about what was needed. My aunt did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She said, very calmly and very clearly, that they had walked out of a hospital and they had not taken the child. My father said this did not need an audience. My aunt said they had made it public when they abandoned a child in a public place. My mother tried one more angle. She said something about how I always turned things into a crisis, how she never got any help from me, how now suddenly they were the villains. I stared at her. Never helps. The words landed on me like something physical. My aunt looked at my mother the way you look at someone who has just tried to hand you a flyer for something you absolutely did not ask for, and she said that was not the story the hospital had, and it would not be the story in her house. My mother's mouth opened and closed. She could feel control leaving the room. The social worker spoke firmly and said that if they were refusing to take custody of the child tonight, she needed that stated clearly. My mother said they were not refusing. My aunt said they had refused earlier. That was why they had called her. The social worker checked her notes and said that aligned with the report. My mother went pale, not dramatically, in a very quiet, very human, very frightened way. The look of someone who has just realized a paper trail now exists and cannot be undone. My aunt stood and said Mila was coming with her. Tonight, and tomorrow, and for as long as it took. My mother's voice sharpened and she said my aunt could not simply take their granddaughter. My aunt said she had had her chance. The social worker confirmed that my aunt was the listed emergency contact and documented the temporary care transfer. My mother's face did something that was almost painful to watch. It tried to smile and simply could not manage it. She turned to me and her voice went soft. She said they would take Mila now, that they had just been overwhelmed earlier. I heard the words. I heard them bounce off the walls. I heard her voice from hours ago saying the child is a nightmare. I did not answer. My aunt asked the nurse to bring Mila in. When Mila walked through the curtain, she did not run to anyone. She moved slowly, carefully, like she no longer fully trusted the room. She looked at me first, then at my mother, then back at me. My aunt crouched down to her level and told her that she was going to stay with her tonight, that her mom was going to be okay, and that she was going to be safe. Mila looked at me like she needed permission. I nodded because my throat was too tight to form words. And Mila leaned into my aunt the way you lean into something when you have been holding your own weight for too many hours and you are finally allowed to stop. My parents left again, and this time the room did not feel emptier. It felt cleaner. After Mila left with my aunt, the quiet that settled into the room should have felt like relief. It did not. It felt like someone had turned the volume down on my entire life and left me alone in the silence with the things I had been refusing to look at for years. I stared at the ceiling and tried to rest, but my mind kept returning to one moment, over and over, on a loop. My mother's voice saying the child is a nightmare like it was casual, like it was a reasonable thing to say. Like Mila was not right there, absorbing every word. The next morning my aunt came back. She looked tired, not fragile tired, but the specific tired you get when you have been up through the night with a child who is not yours, but who is trying very hard not to fall apart. She sat down and told me that Mila had fallen asleep holding her hand. My throat tightened. Then she said she needed to tell me something, and her expression shifted into something that looked almost uncomfortable, like she was about to say words she did not enjoy saying. She told me that my parents had been talking about me for years. Not loudly, not in any way I could point to and prove, but quietly and consistently. Little comments, little stories. She told me the story they had told was that I never helped them, that I was selfish, that I was always too busy, that I made everything difficult. I sat very still. And then my aunt added, voice tightening slightly, that even if any of that were true, it would still not excuse what they had done the night before. You do not abandon a child, she said. You do not say things like that in front of her and walk away." For a moment, all I could hear was the phrase, "even if that were true." I asked her what she meant. She said that was what they had told her, that she was not saying she believed it, that it did not matter either way because nothing justified what they had done. I sat there feeling something cold and sharp spreading through my chest. I told her I had been sending them money every month. The words came out flat, like they belonged to someone else's life. My aunt's expression shifted into confusion. I kept going. I told her about the monthly transfer, $1,580. I told her it had started 7 years ago when my mother called about her back pain and her mysterious treatments that insurance would not cover. I told her about the extra payments that came like pop quizzes, always urgent, always tied to suffering, never large enough to feel worth fighting but never small enough to be painless. My aunt went completely still. She stared at me, and then she stared at my phone when I opened my banking app and started scrolling. Month after month after month. The same number repeated like a heartbeat that had been draining me for 7 years. Her hand went to her mouth. "That is 7 years," I said. "The extra payments are in here too." Her jaw dropped, not in a dramatic, performed way, but in the quiet, stunned way of someone who has just been forced to rebuild their entire understanding of a situation. She said slowly that they had told her I never supported them, that I would not help at all. I laughed once, short and sharp. Apparently, I said, "I am both selfish and an ATM." She looked at the numbers again, and then she looked at me, and something in her face changed completely. It was not pity. It was recognition. "They lied to me," she said softly. And then, even softer, "If they lied to me, they have been lying to you." She did not make speeches after that. She did not promise revenge. She just sat with me for a moment, staring at my phone screen like the numbers might start making sense if she looked long enough. But by the time I was home and on my own couch, sore and exhausted and still in shock, she was already texting me lists. Over the following week, while Mila colored quietly at the kitchen table and my aunt made sure she felt steady and safe, we worked in careful, methodical bursts. We pulled bank statements. We gathered screenshots of the urgent messages. We lined up dates. We mapped the pattern. We did not need drama because the pattern itself was dramatic enough. My aunt hired a forensic accountant and a private investigator, not to break into anyone's records, but to build a clean timeline from what was already traceable from my side, and to verify what my parents had claimed against what they had actually done. When the first preliminary report came in, my aunt slid a slim folder across my kitchen table and said simply that this was just the beginning. I opened it and saw my life reduced to a clean, honest summary: 7 years of transfers, 42 urgent additional payments, a total that I had never allowed myself to add up because adding it up would have forced me to see it. My aunt told me her plan. She said we would not confront my parents at home, where they could rewrite the story in real time. We would do it somewhere they could not escape the truth. "Where?" I asked. "In front of everyone," she said. My parents loved family gatherings the way certain actors love opening night. It was where they controlled the narrative, where they got to play the roles they had spent decades perfecting. A few weeks later, there was a gathering, and everyone was there. Relatives, cousins, a few family friends. My mother was glowing and moving through the room like a hostess in full performance mode, behaving as though nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. My father stayed nearby, scanning exits the way he always did. Mila stayed close to me. My aunt arrived quietly, no announcement, no drama, just calm. My mother's smile went too bright when she saw her. Then, inevitably, my mother tried to restart the familiar script where I am the problem. She laughed and said to a relative, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that I was always dramatic and always needed something. A few people chuckled out of reflex. That is how scripts work. Mila's hand tightened around mine. My aunt stepped forward. She said she would like everyone to listen for a moment. She did not shout. She did not beg. She spoke like someone who had already decided this conversation was happening and was simply informing the room of that fact. Everything slowed down. My mother blinked and tried to ask what was happening. My aunt opened her folder. She said that my parents had been telling people for years that I never helped them. My mother's smile twitched. My aunt held up one hand and said she had seen the receipts. The air in the room changed in a way you could physically feel. My aunt said, calmly and clearly, that for 7 years I had sent them $1,580 every single month, 84 payments, $132,720. Someone nearby whispered that it could not be right. My aunt did not look at them. she continued. She said that in addition to the monthly payments, there had been 42 additional payments requested as urgent at $750 each, totaling $31,500. She looked around the room. Then she said the total, $164,220. My mother went pale. My father stared at the floor. My sister's face collapsed. My mother tried to recover. She said I had offered the money. My aunt's tone did not change. She said the payments had been tied to a story about back pain treatment. My mother insisted her back pain was real. My aunt nodded once and said that was not the question being asked tonight. She held up printed screenshots of the messages one by one. The deposit is due today or they cancel the program. Her back flared again. We need $750 by 3. This next treatment might finally help. She looked around the room and said what those messages were. That was not casual family support, she said. That was a pressure campaign. My sister stepped in, sharp and angry, and said this was none of my aunt's business. My aunt turned slowly and said it had become her business the moment a child was abandoned. The room went completely silent. Then my aunt said the line that landed like something dropped from a great height. She said my parents had come to the hospital, refused to take Mila, and that my mother had said in front of that child that she was a nightmare. My mother's breath hitched. My father's jaw locked with what looked, for the first time, like actual shame. My aunt kept going, her voice perfectly even. She said they had left. She said hospital staff had been required to arrange emergency care because no guardian would take the child. And while Mila was being kept safe by strangers, she said, looking directly at both of them, these two were smiling in photographs on a luxury sea tour with the other grandchildren. My mother said very quietly that they had been busy. My aunt said, "You were on a boat." The silence that followed was the kind that makes your ears ring. My aunt closed the folder gently. Then she said she would be updating her trust, effective immediately. My mother made a small sound, the sound of a person trying to argue before their brain has located the words. My father's face went tight with fear. My sister went completely still. My aunt said, in exactly the same calm voice she had used throughout, that Mila's future would be protected, and that I would not be used as a financial source again. My mother started to say she couldn't. My aunt cut her off politely, finally, completely, like a door closing. She said she could. She looked around at the witnesses and said that people who exploit family do not inherit from her, and people who abandon children do not get rewarded for it. And that was it. No messy shouting. No dramatic speech. No room left to rewrite anything. The story had been told in front of everyone, and it could not be untold. A year later, things were quieter. Not magically repaired, not perfect, just quieter in the way life gets when you stop feeding the chaos that has been consuming you. I did not simply cut my parents off and leave it there. I sued. Not because I wanted revenge, because once I had seen the pattern clearly, I could not look away from it. The money I had sent for back pain treatment did not line up with the treatment story. It lined up with luxury outings and expensive gifts, and a comfortable life funded by transfers from someone who was calculating the price of children's socks in Target aisles. My aunt connected me with a lawyer who liked calendars, screenshots, and numbers, the kind of lawyer who does not get distracted by tears or outrage. We did not try to prove that every single payment had been misused. 7 years is a long time, and treatment is a deliberately vague word. But we proved enough. Enough messages connected to deposits. Enough dates that matched spending and not care. Enough inconsistencies that the story my parents had been selling me stopped sounding like bad luck and started sounding like a system built deliberately around my willingness to help. We pushed, and we won enough to matter. I recovered $68,000. $40,000 came as a lump sum. The rest came slowly, $700 a month for 40 months, and every single deposit felt like evidence that I had not been wrong to trust my own eyes. After the hearing, we went no contact except through the lawyer. Not as punishment, as protection, for Mila and for me. And then something happened that I had not expected. Life filled in the space they left behind. My aunt became a constant presence, Sunday visits and quiet dinners, someone who asked Mila real questions and actually listened to the answers, someone who never once made her feel like she needed to be smaller or quieter or less herself in order to be loved. She set up trust funds, simple and solid, the kind of financial planning that says clearly and without drama, "You are safe, and you are not alone." Sometimes late at night, I still sit with the weight of how far it all went and how long I let it continue, and I wonder if I did the right thing or if I went too far. I am still not entirely sure of the answer. But I know this. Mila no longer asks if Grandma and Grandpa are coming. And the look on her face when she says my aunt's name is one of the most uncomplicated things I have ever seen.